Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election with the impact of Kamala Harris's new vice presidential selection, Tim Walz, who is the governor of the state of Minnesota. Now, as we all know, Minnesota is basically considered a battleground or swing state, but still it overwhelmingly always votes to the Democrats by probably a likely margin. It hasn't gone red in the general election in such a long time, so it's not really a battleground state, and it kind of reminds me of Tim Kaine from Virginia back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton picked him. So this race is really reminding me of 2016. But before we get started with the map with the Tim Walz effect, especially in some of those Rust Belt states where it matters the most, make sure you guys are subscribed, click the bell so you don't miss out on my content, press the like button, give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget, if you are interested, we have memberships. You can find a link to that in the description section. Now back to the topic of today's video. So I'm going to be filling out this electoral map with the impact of Kamala Harris's VP, Tim Walz, and how he can really change this race and bring Kamala new momentum, especially from those blue wall states. And maybe can he potentially build back that blue wall that Trump broke in 2016, but Joe Biden barely got in 2020. So let's start off with the likely states moving into the safe column for Kamala Harris with the impact or Tim Walz effect. Starting off with Colorado, I do think this is now safe, solid blue for Kamala Harris. If the election was held today, I think she'd win the state by like 10 points, so she would be able to get double digits just like Biden did in 2020. The state's actually getting bluer. And then in New Mexico, I do think this is likely for Kamala Harris. I think at this point in time, she'd probably win this by 8 percentage points. Obviously, you have Albuquerque, Democratic stronghold county. It's hard for Trump to overcome the votes in there, especially I believe Tim Walz would really help in that aspect. It has a lot of white liberals in that state, so not going to do good for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris would win New Mexico by a margin of somewhere in between 7 to 10 percentage points if the election is held today. And I do think that Iowa is now likely because of Tim Walz and that effect, and also Ohio is likely. I do think that in Iowa, I think Tim Walz can help Kamala, especially in northern part of this state. And then you have Florida, which is likely for Donald Trump no matter what, and Texas as well. I think both of these states, especially Florida, is really a lost cause for the Democratic Party. No matter who is on the ticket, it doesn't really matter. Florida is a red state at this point in time. It's basically a lost cause for any Democrat. And also Hispanic voters are really shifting towards the right, Cuban Americans specifically. Miami-Dade County flipped from blue to red in the 2022 midterms. Obviously, Ron DeSantis nearly got 20 points. So the state, all across the entirety of Florida, really abandoned the Democratic Party. And obviously, Texas is a border state, so that is a losing issue for Kamala Harris. There's no way where she can do good on the issue of immigration. It's just not possible. Some more likely states for Kamala Harris. I do think Virginia is now likely instead of lean. It was lean before Tim Walz being her VP, but now I think with that effect or the impact of Tim Walz as her VP selection, I do think she would do better in the state of Virginia. She'd win it if the election was held today by probably 6 percentage points if I were to actually, estimate the margin. I do think Virginia is now likely for Kamala Harris, and I also do think New Hampshire is now likely for Kamala Harris. Obviously, the state has a lot of college-educated voters, which really overwhelmingly votes Democrat, and I think Kamala can do better with that, especially with Tim Walz coming in from Minnesota, obviously the Rust Belt state. I just think she would do better in New Hampshire because she chose Tim Walz as her VP. And then, obviously, you have Minnesota, in which I do think right off the bat we can now say this is comfortable for Kamala Harris. Obviously, you have the home state advantage for her VP. Minnesota is now likely. I think if the election was held today, she'd probably win the state by a margin of somewhere in between 7 to 8 percentage points, which is basically close to Tim Walz's victory in this state when he won the governor's race here. And I also do think to get these districts out of the way in Nebraska and Maine, I do think Kamala will likely or actually lean win Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. I do think the impact of Tim Walz as her VP would really help her and boost her numbers in Nebraska's 2nd. I think she can do better in Nebraska's 2nd because Tim Walz really do better in there and help her as well. I also do think that she is now going to do better in Maine's districts because Tim Walz is her VP, and I think he can really do well with some of these moderates. So Maine's 2nd is now going to be likely instead of safe for Donald Trump. Also, means at large is now going to be moving into likely instead of lean for Kamala Harris. Also, you have the third-party candidates. Independents really do well in this state. Obviously, the independent senator Angus King, and so I do think RFK can really take away some support from Trump, and it will really help Kamala in this state, especially with some of those districts. And now we're going to be moving on to the lean states for both of these candidates, starting off with Donald Trump. I do think North Carolina will remain lean for Donald Trump, as well as Nevada. I think he's going to flip Washoe County, as well as run up the numbers in Clark County, the Vegas area, among Hispanic voters as well. That would be key to his victory. And as far as North Carolina goes, this state's actually getting redder. Believe it or not, Republicans are doing tremendous in terms of new registered voters or voter registration. And now the lean states for Kamala Harris, in my opinion, there is no lean states for her. You can argue Michigan, but we're going to be moving on to the tilt states for right now. Starting off with Kamala Harris, I do think Wisconsin is now in Kamala's column. I also do think that she's now going to flip the state of Michigan with the Tim Walz effect, and that's basically the only two tilt states I have for her. Let's start off with Wisconsin. Obviously, this borders Minnesota, which is really the epicenter of where Tim Walz really will affect this race or impact it in favor of Harris. I do think that he will do better in Wisconsin. She will actually, and if she didn't pick Tim Walz as her VP, I do think Trump would be winning Wisconsin as of right now. And we actually take a look at the polling from 538 in the state of Wisconsin, in which as of right now, Kamala Harris is leading. She's beating Donald Trump by a margin of 1.4%. which is actually greater than Joe Biden's margin in this state, which in my opinion is hard to believe. She's at 45.7% to Donald Trump's 44.4% in the state of Wisconsin. So she is winning the state according to the polls, and she is overperforming Biden's margin in this state. And especially considering that these polls were taken before Tim Walz as her VP, it goes to show you that she's probably going to win it by even more than that. And then you have Michigan. Obviously, if she chose someone like Josh Shapiro, who is really pro-Israel and he's I would say, pro-Palestinian protests, then I would say Michigan would go to Donald Trump as of right now, because it had a large uncommitted vote in the Democratic primaries of 100,000 voters voting uncommitted. Now, because we have Tim Walz, who is very, I would say, pro-Palestinian protests, I think that can really help her in that aspect. And considering that also Michigan was the bluest Rust Belt state of the most important three back in 2020, Michigan voted to the left of both Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin went to Biden by almost 3 percentage points. I can tell you right now, if the election is held today, I do have Kamala Harris winning Michigan by probably around a percentage point or so. And now we take a look at the polls from the state of Michigan, in which you would find that Kamala Harris has a lead of 1.6% as of August 6th. And yes, this is taken before Tim Walz being her VP. So imagine that. I believe his impact will only increase her numbers to possibly 2 percentage points. And you have RFK getting 5.6% of the overall vote in this state. So her lead can only grow by election day. Or maybe it won't. Who knows at this point? We don't really know. And the tilt states for Donald Trump, before we end off this video, is going to be Georgia. I do think if the election is held today, he would win it by about a percentage point. Arizona as well, another border state. It's a losing issue for Kamala Harris. And also Pennsylvania, I do think would narrowly go to Donald Trump. So let's start off with Arizona. This state entirely comes down to one county, and that is Maricopa County. It went to Biden by a couple points, and I do think Trump would flip it. And considering that she did not pick, I would say, Mark Kelly as the VP, is going to help Donald Trump in the state of Arizona, or at least it won't help Kamala Harris. We put it that way. And considering that she did pick Tim Walz, I do think he would really take away some of the support from Trump when it comes to the neocons, the establishment, the rhinos of Arizona. A lot of them actually broke for Biden back in 2020 because he was quote-unquote moderate, and he's no longer seen as moderate anymore. So I do think maybe Tim Walz can really help. But it really depends, because most of the time the VP selection really does not change the race. I mean, you can argue J.D. Vance was a bad selection and he still didn't really hurt Donald Trump at all. The VP pick doesn't really move the needle. Now, believe it or not, the state's actually getting bluer, so maybe that can really help Kamala Harris. But, based off the polls, Arizona is basically locked on for Donald Trump. You take a look at the average in this state of Arizona, in which Trump is leading by 1.3%. And it is true that his lead has shrunk from 5 points on average to now 1.3. So as we get closer to Election Day, maybe Kamala can take the lead. But if it was held right now, Trump's narrowly going to win Arizona. Obviously, he can make some gains among Hispanic voters as well. They are shifting towards his right based off of demographics. And then you move on to Georgia, in which Donald Trump was going to do better among African American voters when Biden was the nominee. But now we have Kamala Harris, in which I think that is no longer the case, and she'll do better among that group. And so with that being said, I do think she can win Georgia, but considering that the margin was so low, so small in 2020, of 0.3%, 10,000 votes for Joe Biden, I just don't see how Trump is going to lose Georgia again. Also, their lawmakers are passing laws, election laws actually, in which absentee ballots have to be put in before obviously 8 p.m. And that's not going to help Kamala Harris in the long run. So as of right now, Trump has a 1% lead exactly on the dot in the state of Georgia, according to 538. So that's a tilt margin for him. Obviously, in order for Kamala to do this, she would have to have her numbers in par in line with Joe Biden in Atlanta. The metropolitan area, the suburbs are very important. I don't know if she can quite do that just yet. And as for Pennsylvania, obviously Trump would have to flip Erie County. It's a must, as well as run up the numbers in Centre County. And obviously, Pittsburgh obviously is next to Butler, which is where Trump got shot at. So maybe that can really boost his turnout in the long run. But really is the question. And she does not have the enthusiasm in the Rust Belt, which with Tim Walz, I do think he can help. But still, he's from Minnesota, so I think his impact would be more significant in a state like Wisconsin and Michigan rather than Pennsylvania. I think J.D. Vance would do better in Pennsylvania than someone like Tim Walz, I would say. And then you have Northampton County, which that county only went to Biden by 0.7. So I would say at this point that's an automatic flip for Donald Trump. And you take a look at the polls, which Kamala Harris is barely winning Pennsylvania. It is the reddest Rust Belt state according to 538 by 0.7%. And so I think there will be a polling error, and it's going to help Donald Trump. I think he would win it. So at this point in time, Donald Trump gets 287 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 251 with the Tim Walz effect. This is the map if the election is held today. This is my prediction. Let me know what states you agree with or disagree with in the comment section down below. And one last final reminder is to subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss out on my content, press the like button, give this video a thumbs up. Also, we have memberships. You can find a link to that in the description section. If you are interested, that's pretty much it. Thank you everyone for watching.